Good morning and welcome back to our devotional series here on Red Plains Adventist, going through the book of Philippians. Today we're continuing on in chapter 2. We're going to be starting in verse 12. Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, so now, not only as in my presence, but much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you both to will and to work for His good pleasure. Do all things without grumbling or disputing, that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God, without blemish in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world, holding fast to the word of life, so that in the day of Christ I may be proud that I did not run in vain or labor in vain. Even if I am to be poured out as a drink offering upon the sacrificial offering of your faith, I am glad and rejoice with you all. Likewise, you also should be glad and rejoice with me. Paul is here trying to encourage his followers, those who he has brought to faith in Christ, to be mindful of how they proceed in life, how they are living in the world around them. And this flows out of what we discovered when we were looking at the passages just before it the other day, is that we are supposed to have the mind of Christ in us, that we are supposed to esteem others better than ourselves. The challenge is that our natural inclinations are not to esteem others better than ourselves. Our natural inclinations is to seek to put ourselves first and foremost in everything that we do. And so Paul here says, look, you have to start living your life in a different way. And it's important that this happens in your life. And so he encourages them, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Now, this is a passage that so many people wrest from its context and twist to suit their own ideas about how salvation works. And oftentimes it's used to try to impose legalistic requirements for salvation on others. But if we look at it in its context, Paul is concerned for his followers that they will not be able to rest in this mind of Christ, that our natural inclinations, the flesh that wars against our spirit, will rise up and overthrow the mind of Christ in us, and we will begin to put ourselves first and foremost again. And so Paul is reminding his listeners that they need to be circumspect about how they approach life. But they have to have this mindset that it's not on them. Work out your salvation with fear and trembling. And then he makes this powerful statement, this all-encompassing statement about how the spiritual life is realized every day. He says that it is God who works in us both to will and also to do His good pleasure. You see, what we lose sight of when we start to put ourselves first, when our carnal mind rises up against the mind of Christ, is that I cannot will to do the will of God, and I also cannot actually do it. Any good thing that happens in my life, if I follow this spiritual path, it is because God is working in me both to will and to do of His good pleasure. There's something else that he goes on here to say, do all things without grumbling or disputing, so that you may be blameless and innocent. Oftentimes when we talk about our salvation, we want to talk about the things that we have to do to earn it. But there's something more important for the Christian. There's a higher calling in our lives, that we esteem others better than ourselves. And not that we do this just because out of a sense of obligation. Have you ever listened to someone or talked with someone who was doing something that they really didn't want to do? And all they did was complain about the things that they had to do? Paul is saying, don't be like that. Don't Don't not do these things and then complain about it. Esteem others better than yourself. Let God work in your life and do all of this without grumbling or disputing. And in allowing God to work in you, you will be blameless and innocent children of God without blemish in the midst of a crooked generation. You see, the only way that we appear before God without blemish in our life is if we have fully surrendered ourselves to be clothed in the righteousness of Christ, and we allow Him to will and to do of His good pleasure in our lives. And when that happens, when we learn to settle into this reality that God has called us to, this new life that Jesus has offered us, then we become lights in the world. And when people look at us, they are encouraged, they find hope because they see Jesus living in us. I hope that you will allow God to work in your life today so that His will may be accomplished wherever you go. God bless you. We'll see you tomorrow.